writer, an open source enthusiast, and I think one thing that defines me so much is the fact that I eat cakes a lot. So I'm as well a cake lover. Okay. With contributing to open source, I know you might have heard you need to, for the people that are new here contributing to open source, you might have heard about using Git and GitHub, and it's usually a scare most times for many developers because of some people are not really used to the command line. So I want to tell you, if you're scared of Git, do not actually be scared, because I think everybody has Git issues. There's this joke I used to make, and I used to be like, even Linus Torvalds, he surely has Git issues too, because Git will always want to mess you up. So you should not be scared to try, because in trying you learn, right? You learn how to use Git. So a state of code on the code base, so you whatever you have, whatever project you're working on, and you want to go back like store stuff in cloud. So GitHub has a whole lot of features, but it basically helps you manage and upload your Git repositories to the cloud, and helps you like store your project and collaborate on other projects. So one thing why Git and GitHub is usually like really necessary, or let me say GitHub is really necessary in your open source journey, is because most of the open source projects, right? They are on GitHub. Just some are actually on GitLab, but you find majority on GitHub. So it's like, that's why you have to like always at least know that basics of GitHub to be able to like contribute to a project. And good enough, I'm going to be making this session a little interactive. I'm not just going to be talking and talking. I actually like planned a sort of a mini workshop, like since the theme of the event is contributing to open source, I just put up something where I could show you how to like contribute to an open source project, a very simple project. And as the session goes, I'll explain more on that. So the next slide is actually really very sensitive. Yeah. You would now ask what's like the difference between Git and GitHub. So I kind of know that I don't like first using this analogy here, because some people might not be really okay with it, but I'm going to still talk more on the difference between Git and GitHub on the next slide. So it's like this picture, this discussion here, the person answered the difference between Porn and Pornhub. So basically, like I said earlier, Git is like the version control system where you can work with on local, right, and be able to keep track of your changes and see your changes as per so many years ago, or undo your changes or stuff. While GitHub is like the cloud platform, where the website where you like store your repositories in cloud and collaborate, push and bring back code, and the rest of the features, right? So now there's actually a difference, in the sense that now without you cannot actually use GitHub efficiently without the use of Git, right? So it's like GitHub is dependent, or it's really dependent on Git, but for Git you can work with it without GitHub, right? Like I said earlier, you can work with it on your local system, So you can work with Git without GitHub, but somehow GitHub is dependent on using Git. So I highlighted like some differences, some clear differences, where I said like for Git, it helps like keep track of your changes. You can work on multiple branches. You can undo changes. You can view previous with a simple command. You'll be able to view previous changes, right? Then for some features of GitHub is you are able to host your code on cloud. Like I said, a handy web UI user interface to see things, or a place where collaborators can easily view, clone, and contribute to the project. So I'm going to be talking more on that clone and contribute to the project later on, right? So this like the highlight of the main differences, like between like Git and GitHub, aside the other funny one of the difference, it seems that difference between Porn and Pornhub. So like I said, I'm going to like you don't have to do this on your own side. You don't have to like really do this on your own side. It doesn't just, you can just follow along. Then if you're lost, you can like ask questions. I think there should be a question time, right? If I'm not mistaken. So you can
Yes.
maybe sure. So you can maybe like jot down like questions. So talk of, okay, let me just give me a sec. So the prerequisite for this is just you should have like a GitHub account. If you don't have one, you should have Git locally installed, and there should be a repository that you want to contribute to. You can't actually contribute without there being a repository, right? So, and also you should have vibes to contribute. Why I put vibes to contribute? Because most of the time it's really like that first time it's really hard to put in that effort. Most of the time you might get discouraged, like especially with Git. Like I want you to pardon me in case I'm going to run into any errors. Just know that I'm not a Git guru, or nobody's a Git guru, right? So you should have that vibes to contribute, because you might get into errors, and you might not even want to start googling the errors, because most times when you google themselves you get more confused. So the vibes to contribute is really necessary too. So okay, so I'll go over to contributing, like the practice I want to do. Okay, so yeah, this is visible, right? Is this visible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, let me go ahead. So this is like okay, yeah. So this is a repository on GitHub. It's you don't really need to bother yourself with so much details. It's one of the repositories I won a conference I was a mentor for. It was a Git workshop. We used it for a Git workshop. So basically, with contributing to open source, there are some things that I usually like always say. When you see a repository, you always have to know what the repository is about. Like I just gave you a brief intro about what this repository is about. It's like it was a repository. There's always the about, where you can like read about the project. Then you have to also look at the README, right? The README usually has content of what you should do in the repository, or what the whole project or the open source software is about. Like it's always contained on the README. So if you are looking at this, the only thing we have to do here is to add your name to the contributors.md file as a contributor to practice, right? So that's like the task here. Add your name to the contributors file. There's also one repository I'll also recommend for people that want to, like, first time contributors. It's called First Contributions. I'll drop the link to it in the chat later. So let's go ahead, and so I'm going to be adding my name because I'm the one actually contributing, right? So let's go ahead and do this. So after consuming what the project is about, the README, most of the time, like the contributing guideline, which is always found like on the repository, right? It's always found on the README. You always see the contributing guideline for every open source project or every open source software or repository on GitHub. So there's always the contributing guideline, which is something you have to take note of too. So next up, you have to fork the project. So I'm not going to go into so many details of basic Git and GitHub. I also recommend something like there's this GitHub Learning Lab where it's really very interactive, where you can like take GitHub tutorials, and I really recommend that. I'll also drop that in the chat. So like I said, you have to, like, first thing is you have to fork the repository. So if you see on the place like they say, when you fork the repository, now you make it like a copy of your own. So forking the repository means you have like a copy, and with working with people's projects or open source projects, you always have to like fork the repository first before you don't contribute directly to the repository, to avoid merge conflict, to avoid trouble in relatable terms, right? So let's go ahead. Okay, fork this repository. So yeah, so I'm forking this repository, and if you look here, you'd see the name ID like changed. So it was forked from this source, and this is now mine, right? This like mine. So now we have, that's the first step, forking the repository. So the next step is I have to get this repository down to my local system. Like, to work with it, there are like two ways you can do this. You can contribute via you can contribute directly on the cloud. You can actually contribute directly on the cloud without having to go to local. But most of the time, why I recommend you doing local is because so you get conversant with the command line, so you not just keep running away from the command line, because there are some projects you contribute to, and it's actually there are some steps you can't really do on cloud. There's some features that are not really available on cloud. So you always like have to like clone it to local, and you always have to use the command line at the end of the day. So why not start with like using the command line from the first day, right? So you can contribute on cloud, but for this one, because I recommend you doing it on local, I'm going to be doing local, right? So the next thing is taking this repository and downloading it to your local system, right? So to do that, click on code. First, I said earlier, the prerequisites, you need Git Bash installed locally on your system, which I have open here already. I hope this is visible. Is the Git Bash visible? I really tried. Oh, okay, because I wanted to like increase the text, but I don't think I tried doing that. I couldn't do it. So okay, so like I said earlier, like you need Git Bash installed locally on your system. I'm actually someone. I was echoing it for a bit. Okay, so the first thing you do is git clone. So git clone the HTTP or URL address. But git clone is like, it's a command to download it to your local system. So let me just copy this first. So copy the HTTP address. So there are other ways you can actually clone. There's the use of SSH, which I'm not going to talk about, and GitHub CLI, which is really new now. It's like a GitHub command line interface that is really very straightforward. So you copy the HTTP address, and so first off, I want to cd into the folder I want to clone this to, right? So cd into whatever folder or document you want to clone this to. I think my time is running very fast. Okay, so our git clone HTTP address, paste. Okay. Hope I don't pass the time. Okay, so that's done. So our cd into the repository I just cloned, OST. So I'm using tab for auto-completing. So the next thing is, usually you create a branch and check out into that branch. So it's like you have to create a branch you don't contribute directly to the master. You like create a branch that is separate so that you can make a pull request with that branch. So in case anything happens, you can easily delete off that branch and really like start afresh. So this command is to check out a new, create a new branch and check out the branch. So I'm going to call that branch my name. Okay, so I switched to a new branch and I created a new branch and switched to it. So there's a command to open VS Code from your terminal, which is code dots. So I think while I wait for that, please, if there's any question, I can take it, so I don't overshoot the time. Um, okay, so okay, if there's any question, I can take it while I wait for VS Code to open. Like VS Code and Chrome, they are two enemies, so it's going to like uh mm, okay. Oh, okay. There, I missed that question. Okay, I don't actually, okay, the command to open for a notepad, I'll actually have to like research, Google search on that because I don't really know the command to do that. So I'll like maybe probably like get back to you on that. Okay. Okay, so like the task earlier was to like add your name to the contributors.md file, right? And this is the file. Then let me open the file here. So this is the contributors.md file under the OST smart folder. So I have successfully actually downloaded this or put this repository on my this project on my local system, right? And so I'm going to, okay, it's on an alphabetical order. So it means that it's R. It's R. So it's okay. So what I have to do here is add my name, Ruth. So I just added my name to the repo. That was like the task to add your name to the contributors.md file as a contributor, which I just did. So the next thing now is after making the changes, the next thing is pushing it back to GitHub or like taking pushing the changes back to the repository on GitHub and making a pull request, right? Like a pull request is in relatable terms is like, this is my change, add it to your project, so something like that, right? So the next thing is, so I open VS Code has an inbuilt terminal, so I open that. Yeah, so if okay, so if you do for you to check what changes or what file you have changed, there's a command called Git Status. Or so you see that you just modified this folder you see it in red. So the next thing is to add this commit or add this change to the staging area to like for you to be able to do your commit and push back to GitHub, right? So the next thing is git add the name of the file, or you can just do a dot. Just because of time, I'm going to be really very fast. So git add will now add this file that the commit you just made to the staging area. And if you do a git status again, you see that it will change. Sorry. If you do a git status again, you'd see. Sorry. A Git status, you'd see that this it was in red before. Now it has been added to this staging area, so you can now commit the changes. So the commit message is just saying like a brief of what you did on that commit. So git commit -m added my name, right? So this is the commit message. So you git commits. Okay. So the next thing now is pushing your changes back to the cloud, right? So you do the command for that is git push origin. Then I'm pushing the branch. Remember I said creating, you have to like create branches. So I'm going to push the branch name. Sorry. So git push origin the branch name. Okay, so you see I've successfully pushed this these changes I've made on my local back to GitHub, right? So let's go back and check that. So if you go back to the repository, you'd see like you see the my name has like recent pushes less than a minute ago. So what you now do is compare and create a pull request. So you click on this. All right. So this is like after you click on that, this page will show up. So like I said, this was the commit message that was there. So this will be like the title of the repository, right? You can expand this. Added my name to contributors list. Right? Then you can properly like be more descriptive on this area here. You can be more descriptive about like the changes you made. Maybe saying I added my name to the right, or maybe putting if it's an issue you are fixing. If it's an issue you are fixing, you can put in this issue fixes this, or this PR fixes this issue, or whatever you want to be descriptive about here. So you click on create pull request. And that's actually all. So what happens is you have created a pull request. So the maintainer or whoever is overseeing the project comes, reviews your changes or your code or whatever you did, your commit, whatever you made, and if it's all okay and good, it will be like merged to the original repository, right? So that's like a short, a basic intro or basic practice. With time or as time goes on, it changes, but that's like the basic things you need to do, and you should not be like scared to do anything or sorry, scared to start, because it's when you actually start that you can keep learning more. And even though you run into errors, you can ask questions to people. You can always ask a question to me. I'm always available on Twitter to like lead you through. Or if you're not okay with this, you can send a message and we like do a one-on-one contribution basis, right? Uh, sorry. So the credit to this slide is at my GM Cat's thread, a Twitter thread on the difference between Git and GitHub. So on that thread, there were like many views and many. So I took so many stuff out of that thread. Then the image was from Pin Interest. And thank you for listening. And my social article I wrote, I'm always at Twitter, so I'm always open for a discussion on how to get it to start contributing to open source. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Honestly, that was a very, very interactive and interesting session. I really hope we all enjoyed that session. For those that didn't join early, I'm just going to give a brief summary of what she explained and demonstrated. She started with don't be afraid of Git, and it's okay to have Git issues. Then she went on to explain the difference between Git and GitHub and their uses too. Then she mentioned the prerequisites needed to contribute to open source. One of some of and they are a GitHub account. You have to have Git locally installed in your system, a repository to contribute to, and lastly, vibes to contribute. Then she went on to demonstrate how to contribute to open source. This event is being recorded, so if you still want to catch up and listen to it and watch it too, you can. At the end of the day, it should be made the recording should be made available on the group chat, so you can watch it there. Okay, it's question and answer time. So if you have any questions for Ruth, please send it to the chat box so that she can take your questions. Okay, she has sent the slides to the chat box, so please save them. Please, if you have any questions for Ruth, send them to the chat box. We'll be taking questions in the next 2 minutes. In the meantime, while we're waiting for questions, is there anyone that would like to talk about what they've learned today? If not, you'd like to, like, in a minute or so, share what you have learned, please indicate. I've shared what I've learned, and yeah. I think one new thing I learned is how to open VS Code from your Git bash. I never knew that. So thank you very much, Ruth.
Yeah, I want to share my what I learned also. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, I was always afraid of that command line. I don't know for what reason, but I've been able to uh, learn some of those command syntax I can use to get myself to make my changes. So I was always afraid of that stuff. But now I think I can take it on. Thank you so much, Ruth.
Thank you, Ruth. Okay, is there anyone else that would like to share what they have learned or have any questions? Please, if you have any questions, send them to the chat box. We'll be moving to the next session quickly. Okay, in the absence of none, We're going to move to the next session. Our speaker for this session is Shedrack Akintayo. He is a developer advocate who has love for community building, open source, creating content and software for the next billion users. As a technical writer and speaker, he shares his knowledge about JavaScript, React, and building APIs. In this session, he's going to be talking to us about documenting our open source projects. So on that note, please, as I hand over the invisible mic to Shedrack, let's send our virtual claps to the chat box as he takes over this session.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's a honor to speak to everyone of you here. So today I'm going to be talking about documenting open source projects. I mean, after getting started with GitHub, and you want to start contributing, you want to start building open source products, open source software. Eventually, you would need a documentation that would describe what your software is doing, right? How people would use your software and the roadmap for your software. So that's basically what I'm going to talk about. I'm just not going to talk about how to build one out, like really setting principles and structures and even applications that you could use to build your open source software. So let me just share my screen and get started. Okay. Tab. Okay, if you can see my screen, please just let me know that you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Awesome. Okay, so like Sarah said, I guess, yeah, Sarah, I'm a developer advocate at Cloud Foundry Foundation. We are an open source platform as a service that provides the best experience on Kubernetes. I'm also a technical writer for Smashing Magazine and LogRocket, and I'm also an open source community builder. That's all about me, nothing much. So today what we're going to be discussing, we're going to be talking about documentation, importance of documentation in open source. OSS stands for open source, just in case. Tips for writing effective docs, traits of successful OSS docs based on like my experience with open source software docs, tools for writing good OSS docs, possible structure for your documentation, and examples of good open source docs I could see. So before we begin, very important, docs have use, which is for reading. So you should always read the docs. It will save you a lot of time. It will save you time that you used to go to Stack Overflow. Reading the docs would actually save time. So read the docs, read them, very important. So what is documentation? So documentation is actually it's a general word, but we're just going to limit it to just programming in general. So documentation in programming is basically any written text, illustration, or media that gives detailed information about a particular software. So all documentation does is to inform people that want to use a particular software what the software is about, gives information about it. And this information could include how to use the software, how the software operates, what they are expecting the software to look like in the coming years. So in other words, a roadmap. So that's basically what documentation is. There's not so much to it, but it's also one of the most important function parts of a software in general, not just in open source generally. So forms of documentation. So I'm pretty sure like most of us here think documentation is just like maybe written text, maybe a README file or notes, etc. But like various forms of documentations that exist. So the most popular ones that we've had is README, GitHub README, written text in general, release notes. So for every single release of your software, it comes with changes, a list of changes that has happened, or a list of features that were deprecated. So also documentation for that particular release. Illustrations. So for very large open source software, they have roadmaps. Roadmaps are like an illustration of how they want the software to look like in the coming years. So it lists out the features they're working on, which features they're working on, the features that will be worked on, and community is community contribution to certain features. So it's just like a guide for how the software is going to look like in the coming years. And videos. So videos are also used in form of documentations. Although they are not so popular, like a lot of people don't use videos for documenting software, but other bigger organizations where there are a lot of teams working on certain things, so they need videos to be able to document their large projects. Also audio, and something that we do not even see as documentation is comments in code. So when we comment our code, we're actually documenting our software. I mean, the essence of documentation in general is just to tell us how give us detailed information about our software. So writing comments in code is actually a form of documentation. So importance of documentation in open source software. So like there are so many importance, but I'm just going to highlight a few. First is it helps educate people and keep track on all aspects of the software. I mean, that's the main essence of having a documentation, to educate people that would want to use your software, educate people that would want to learn more about your software. So that's one of the important. So it improves the quality of the software. So I mean, one thing that makes a very good software, that makes a great software, is how good the documentation is. I mean, you can be badass when it comes to writing code. You can make a very good product, a very good software. Sorry for using product, a very good software. But issues come in when people do not know how to use your software. I mean, you could use the latest language features, the latest languages, but if people cannot use your software with ease, then it is not as effective or quality as it should be. So writing very good documentation is also one feature qualities of a very good software. So the next one is it informs people on all the changes made of the software, including version updates. Like I said, release notes. So any single change that has been made, the documentation would serve as a log for all the changes that have been made. That's why we have release notes. Release note is a form of documentation. Lastly, but not the least, it informs people on what aspect of the software is currently being worked on by the maintainers of the open source project. So roadmaps. So like I said, roadmap provides a guide for people to know what is like features that are going to come into a particular software, features that would come in, features that are being worked on currently. So that's one of the like importance of documentation in open source. So tips for writing effective OSS docs. Sorry for the whole alignment issue. I don't understand. I think it's Google Slides that is having the issue. So the first thing you can do, I mean, like I said, if you have a software that people cannot use, it is not serving its purpose. If you have an open source software that people cannot use, it's not serving its purpose. I mean, what's the point of open sourcing a software that people cannot use? Like, it makes no sense, right? So the first thing you would do is, there are various ways, but this is based on my experience writing documentation. The first thing you would do is to define a style guide for your documentation and make sure you enforce it. Even for contributors, make sure that you enforce the style guide. Very important. So the style guide is like a design. Is that, let me just use its design system as an example. It's like a design system for your documentation, how you want things to be structured, how you want things to be arranged, what kind of words you want to use, what kind of should you want to use them, do you want to use markdown, do you want to use rich text, do you want to use MDX? So it depends on what you want. Just make sure that there's a style guide that people can follow when writing, when you're making your documentation. The next thing is pick up a markup style and stick with it. So markup style in the sense that your documentation could be a markdown, it could be regular text, it could be anything. Just make sure that you pick a particular style of writing and stick with it. Make sure that you enforce it across your like, this is something that is general in technical writing. Writing documentation is a form of technical writing. You would want to talk to people. You would want to write a documentation like you're talking to people in real time. So you would want to use that you're using we instead of you. So you want to make sure that as they grow older, right? So you don't know the kind of people. It could be old people, it could be young people. So you want to be inclusive for everybody, irrespective of their age, irrespective of how long they've been on earth for. So one way you can make sure that you cater for every single person, irrespective of how long or short their attention span is to make use of simple and short sentences. This way, there's an efficient communication system that has been created between the creator of the documentation and the people that are reading documentation. So when you use simple and short sentences, people are able to grasp certain aspect of your software very easily and fast. And this way, they would not spend so much time reading documentation instead of building. At the end of the day, we want to build stuff, right? You don't want to spend the whole time that we have to build stuff on reading documentation to figure stuff out. So always make use of simple and short sentences instead of long sentences. Nobody's trying to prove that they are a literature student, or nobody's trying to prove they're a professor. So what makes communication effective is using simple and short sentences so that everybody can understand, irrespective of how well they understand English. I mean, so one of that scenario is, imagine a person that whose first language is not English, and you need to, you're building software, you're building open source software, you're building for the global community, right? Irrespective of whether you're based in Nigeria, irrespective of whether you know people outside the country, it doesn't matter. People would definitely find your software. The internet is a very, the internet is a very small place. You would see a lot. You definitely find your code. So one thing is you want to do is to make sure that you are catering for every single person that would come on your documentation, irrespective of whether you know them or not. So people that their first language is not English would have issues reading complex sentences. I mean, they're just struggling with English, and you are trying to complicate the whole matter for them. So when you have simple and short sentences, you cater for people that their first language is English, their first language is not English, people that are good with English, or people that are still learning English. So that's an efficient flow of communication through across every single demographic. Also, next is to make sure to format your documentation properly for easy reading. This is something I always emphasize on. I mean, whenever I write anything, I always try to make sure that there's this format of every single thing. So for subheadings, I have this particular font size. For headings, there's a particular font size. For code, there's a particular format for writing code. So just make sure that you are like every single thing is formatted properly so that people can easily read your documentation and would spend less time. So the goal of documentation is to encourage people to build faster, to build more instead of reading. So they build more. So if you have an effective documentation, people can find whatever they want to do easily. People can go to, okay, I want to check how to carry out authentication, and there's a menu for authentication. Just click on it, read the instruction, and boom, you are good to go. You spend lesser time on the documentation and more time reading and more time writing code. So another example includes code sample and sample code and examples. Very important, because so a lot of people like myself, I kind of do not read the documentation itself. I just go straight to the example and see how the person is doing a particular thing instead of reading words. So there are people that prefer to see actual examples, people that prefer to see code. Get me? People that prefer to see code instead of reading words. So you want to cater for both kinds of people. So the thing is, the whole concept of development has changed over the years. I mean, if you're a software developer, you're not just and you're an open source country developer, you're not just building stuff for people in your country anymore. You're building stuff for the global community. You might not know who is using it, but I'm pretty sure that people from outside your country are using whatever code, whatever software you're writing, or whatever thing you are doing. So you want to cater for every kind of person that is existing. So I mean, this is you can't necessarily cater for everybody, but you should cater for the regular amount of people that would come and check your stuff. So being inclusive and is very, very important in software development today. I mean, so there's that. And lastly, use visual devices to represent information, illustration, tables, graphs. So, like I said before, a lot of people do not really like reading words. I'm like, a lot of people don't like reading. So one thing you can do to cater for those set of people is to use illustration, tables, graphs to represent your information. So instead of writing a long list of maybe features, you can use an illustration, maybe a circle illustrating how these features look like, or how these features are, what these features are. So it's very important to, at some point, use visual devices to represent information so people don't get bored reading. I mean, words are sort of boring at some particular time. So when people attention span has dropped, they begin to look for a way to quickly get their job done. So one thing you can do to help people is to use visual devices so they can just see a diagram. People feel more happy when they see a diagram of explaining whatever they are supposed to do. So that's one very, very effective tip. So let's look at, like, what are the traits of successful open source documentation. Like, I mean, we've seen a lot. There are a lot of documentation across GitHub, across GitLab, but like, what is the trait of the successful ones? The first thing is the easy access to information regarding core aspects of the software. So, like I said, people should spend less time reading documentation and more time building. So a successful open source documentation should help people get easy access to information regarding the major aspect of their software. One other thing is it should be well structured. So things should not be scattered. It should be like I said, a style guide for how to do things. It should be well structured. If you want if the core aspect should be here, it should be there. You should not like interchange things. There should be a flow of information from the highest the most important features to the less important ones. It should be well structured so people can easily access information. At the end of the day, the most important trait of a successful open source documentation is that people should be able to easily access information. Very important. It should also help developers learn to use the open source software quickly. So another thing is, I see a software, I'm trying to use it in my code. I'm trying to use whatever product I'm building personally, and I am sort of a new developer. So one thing you can do is, when you write a very good documentation, it helps people learn that your particular subject faster and quickly. I mean, time is mostly not on our side of developer. Like, your project manager can be on your neck to submit stuff quickly. So one thing open source contributors can do for regular people, for people that are not contributors, people that are going to use their open source software, is to make sure that they make sure that the documentation is very easy to understand for new developers especially. One other thing is they should simplify the usage of the open source software. This is very, very, I mean, that's the core, at the end of the day, that's the major importance of the documentation. You should make sure that it simplifies how to use the software so people don't have to figure stuff out by themselves. I don't have the time to be going through your code base to understand what is for what and what is for what. So what you can do for me as an open source contributor and as the user of your software is to simplify the usage, write examples, use less complex words, document out the most important part of the software that I know everybody would want to use. So that's also one very important trait. And lastly, cut the amount of time. So each successful open source documentation would cut the amount of time users of the open source software need support, like physical support or personal support. And there are some open source software that actually provide personal support. The ones that maybe you need to subscribe to their Patreon or maybe buy a license. I mean, there are open source like software like that I've seen a couple that you probably need to subscribe to their Patreon or something, and they'll be providing personal support for you. So it should cut the amount of time users need that particular support. If your documentation is great, people would not need to go to Stack Overflow. People would not need to go to other question and answering platforms to get answers to your particular software. I mean, imagine your software is not that large, it's not big, it's not popular. So you're expecting me to go and write, I mean, somebody in maybe, I don't know, somebody, a very new developer created software that somebody like me want to use. I feel like it's nice. And nobody else has used it. How do you want me to search for answers to it? So one important thing you can do for me is to make your documentation as verbose, as understandable as possible. I mean, if you check a documentation like Stripe, I mean, Stripe is not an open source documentation, but for let's just emulate with Stripe. Stripe has one of the best documentation in the world when it comes to software development. Every single thing you need, 90% of the time you don't need support, you don't need personal support. So if expected of, I mean, Stripe is a very big company. They have people working on their documentation 24/7. The least we can do is to actually emulate them in open source. So I mean, we've gone through all the important aspects of writing documentation. So what if I actually need to write documentation? I need some tools to help me write documentation. The first thing, I mean, there are tons of tools you can use to write good open source documentation. There are tons of tools. But one thing, I'm just going to highlight a few that most people are like probably used to. Docusaurus. So Docusaurus is an open source documentation generator for open source documentation generator for that was created by Facebook, and it's currently open source itself. So if you need a website for your open source project, that generates a documentation for you, you can use Docusaurus. Also Sphinx. So Sphinx is what is called a documentation generator. This means it takes a bunch of source files in plain text and generates a bunch of other awesome things, mainly HTML. So all you just have to do is to write your documentation in source file, and it will generate a page for you to be able to like give people link to, and they can read it. So you can use Sphinx, and the most popular one, the most popular one is using GitHub and GitHub pages. So I mean, the way we use GitHub is to write a documentation in the README file and dump it there for people to see with Markdown. So you can have your documentation in your README file. All you just have to do is create a readme.md file and use Markdown to write your entire documentation. I think it's the most fastest, it's the easiest to use. And the most popular one, like other than GitHub pages, is Readydocs. So Readydocs is not just for open source software, it's for every type of software. Readydocs it also gives you a link to your documentation that you can share out to people. So it simplifies software documentation by automating building, versioning, and hosting of your docs. So another important part of building documentation is versioning. So you need to be able to tell people that this is version 1. You need to have a tab for that. This is version 2 of the documentation. This is version 3. So people should know where they are going to. I mean, if you release a new feature, a new release of your software, then there should be a new version. I mean, if you did a release that has a major breaking change, like did a lot of changes, then you should actually create a new version for your documentation. That's very, very important. So people can know, okay, if I want to I'm still using the old version, I can go to the version 1 documentation and read about it. Very important. So I think for the most part, this is probably what you need most time for writing documentation, OSS documentation. So now I actually want to start writing, right? So this is just like what I'm going to just tell you guys now is like a possible structure for your open source documentation, how it should look like, outlines basically. So the first thing you want to do is getting started. How can people quickly get started with your software? Should they npm do this, that, or yarn do this, that? You have installed it, import it, and you are good to go. That's like the fastest way you can tell people to get your documentation, to get you to use your software in your documentation. And that thing is for larger open source software is architectural design, how the software was built architecturally. It's just going to be a diagram of how data flows through your application, your software. It's very, very important. In production usage guide. So you need to create at the end of the day, we use software in production. when we leave development, the next thing is we want to push to production. So you need to tell people if there's any special thing they need to do to go to production. You need to write that guide, because at the end of the day, the thing we are using software for is for production usage. So one of that thing is use cases. So you need to write out use cases, certain use cases for your software. So I myself, I might just be checking it out and see your software and like, okay, what can I use this for? So you need to create a list for that of how people can use your open source software. Then references. So if you pick out maybe code from somewhere when you're building, I mean, it's still open source. You can, as long as the licenses allows you to do that. If you pull out code from somewhere, you always add that to your references. You can use a particular article to understand something about how you did X in your software. You need to put that. So referencing is just a way of encouraging the people that the resources you use to build out your software, encouraging the people that wrote it. So you need to just give them that honor, that you respect their work. And in technical writing, is just something very, very important, because plagiarism is bad, and I would not want any one of you or anyone, even myself, to use a particular, to pick out someone's intellectual property and use it for myself and not reference it back to the person. It's not nice. It's not nice at all, and it's it's the greatest sin in technical writing. Plagiarism is the greatest sin in technical writing. So some good examples of good OSS doc. So I mean, a lot of us have seen a lot of like open source software documentation. So one of the best I've seen is Gatsby. Gatsby is wonderful. Gatsby, I don't even know how to put how much I love Gatsby docs. The React docs is fantastic. React, you don't even need a tutorial to actually learn how to use React. Documentation is enough for you. Same thing with the Vue.js docs and our home-based software, open source software, Chakra UI, which is a React component library for building accessible UIs. The documentation is really, really good. Shegun and his team really did, and the other contributors really did an amazing job building the documentation for people that want to get started with using using Chakra UI. One other thing is GitHub Open API Docs. So the GitHub Open API Docs is not necessarily open source, but it's GitHub is a major part of open source. So I think the best I could do for them is to include their doc. If you've used the GitHub API, I don't even need to explain why this is good, because it's one of the best API documentation I've seen in a very, very long time, apart from Stripe and REST. They took their time to highlight most of the important things, the less important things. I mean, you should check it out. It's very, very interesting. And lastly, the Cloud Foundry docs, the company I work. Obviously, I'm the one working on the documentation, so I would want to hype myself a little bit. So, and Cloud Foundry documentation is wonderful. It adheres to all the practices of what a good open source documentation should look like. And yeah, that's some of the examples. There are tons of other documentations that are good, but I mean, there's no time to start talking about every single one. But these are like the ones I decided to highlight. So there's Katisera in a particular conference. She said something that should always stick with people that are writing documentation, that want to write documentation. She said Katisera was she's the author of the Headfirst series. So I don't know if you've seen Headfirst JavaScript, you've seen Headfirst jQuery. She's the major author of it, and she's an O'Reilly. She was working at O'Reilly, I think, also, but she is no longer active. She left the tech community. She changed careers because of harassment and the rest. So sexual harassment generally. So we lost the tech ecosystem, lost a very, very wonderful person, which is sad. So she said in a conference, if you want to make them read the F is there for, is censored. If you want to make them, you want them to read the effing manual, make a better effing manual. So this is everything. This is just my entire talk in general. If you want people to read your documentation, take your time to make it better documentation for them, so they don't have to go to other places to seek answers, to seek solutions to a particular bug they are facing, or how to do certain things in with a particular software. So please and please, if you're pushing out any open source code, any open source project, the least you could do for people that you want them to use your project is to make a good documentation for them. So if you want to read mostly on how to write better documentation in general, you can check out these links, and a couple of what I put in the slides are from this particular link. So you should check it out if you want to learn more about documentation in general and open source documentation. So yeah, thank you. I mean, 100% documented. It feels good. So how you can connect with me? If you can always reach out to me at Twitter at coda_BLVCK Black, on GitHub if you want to, I don't know, check my code. I don't like I use GitHub much, but Hacktivist123. And if you want to send an email, maybe a partnership or something, I don't know, you can always reach out to me at firstname@gmail.com. So thank you so much for coming to this session, for listening to me rant about open source documentation. It's my pleasure to be here. So thank you. If you have any questions, please let me know.
Okay, thank you so much, Shadrach, for that amazing session. Honestly, I learned a lot of things, and I could relate to a lot of things too. So if you have any questions for Shadrach, please send them to the chat box. Okay. Bami has a question. So you can unmute yourself and say your question.
Okay, hi Shadrach. Good afternoon, I guess. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes. So my question is, when does your software become, I don't know, will I say big enough for you to follow the actual process? Then you can maybe deceive yourself a bit and tell yourself this is more, nobody's reading it. Like I have like just 2 folks or something. Who cares about it? So when does it cause that particular border and you feel like you have to actually start implementing all this?
I mean, you can move this from the beginning. I mean, if you have the time. If you have the time, yes, but if you don't, you can just do the basic stuff. So one, I would say when you have like, I mean, you have like 500 stars on GitHub, but your software has 500 stars, and you check npm, maybe say JavaScript package, and you see maybe 1,000 people you downloaded per week. I mean, that's enough. That's enough evidence for you to know that, man, I need to like brush up on fix the documentation, because I have this much people that actually downloading my stuff by software per week. So that's that. But I would just advise that you if it's you just lay a foundation for yourself, or use the rules and regulations. Just use it. You don't know if your software is going to be big, and it will also be a learning process for you. I mean, you would end up writing company documentation at some point. So if you've already done this in the open source space, doing it for your company or wherever you work with would be very easy for you because you've done it already. So one thing I would only just say is lay a very good foundation for your documentation, and you can also use it as a learning phase. So you can implement all I've said on a very small project. It's also a means of learning, right? And to write subsequent documentation after that would be very, very easy for you. That's all, basically.
Okay, thank you so much. Bami, I hope your question has been answered and you understand what he said. Okay, if you have any more questions, please send them to the chat box. Okay, while we are waiting for questions, I want to briefly summarize what he has said in case you didn't tune in early or you got logged out at some point. Okay, he started with emphasizing on reading documentation. Once you install any software, any open source software, before you watch any tutorial, it is advised that you first of all read documentation. He explained documentation. He talked about various forms of documentation, some of which include written text, illustrations, videos, and of course, comments in code. He went on to outline the importance of documentation, He explained the tips for writing effective open source software docs. I'm just going to mention two of which I feel is very, very important. Number one is to make sure to format your documentation properly for easy reading and include sample code and examples. For me, that is like very, very important. He highlighted traits of successful OSS docs and said that the most important was easy access to information regarding core aspects of the software. He also mentioned some good tools for writing good OSS docs: Docosaurus, Sphinx, GitHub and GitHub pages, and read the docs. He gave a possible structure for your documentation. I believe that the slides will be available in the chat box, so you can just check out some of the things he outlined. Then he mentioned some examples of good OSS docs, some of which include Gatsby, React, Vue, and so on. So if you want to replicate writing good OSS docs, you can check out some of the examples of good OSS docs. Okay, nobody has asked any questions, so I assume that there is no questions. I really hope we enjoyed the session because I definitely did. I was blessed and I liked the flow of the event. It started with how to contribute to open source, then went on to how to document your open source project. I actually really like that flow. On this note, I'd like to hand over to Ifihan to give a give her closing remark.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope we enjoyed the session for today, starting from Roots, who talked about introduction to Git and GitHub, to Shadrach, who talked on documenting your open source projects. So, um, yeah, this is, like I said earlier, it's coming from October. Our event that was meant for October 1st, so we're having it now, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you have any more questions, you can keep on dropping and we will answer. So I just want to say that, just want to tell us about the events we'll still have coming up at DSC. So we'll continue our Android Study Jam this week. If you've not, or you want to be part of it, if you've not joined or you want to be part of it, you can join them this week at dsunilag.dev/Android Study Jam beginner. So, and also we have our study groups which have started, and next week we'll be organizing an event for them. So if you want to be part, it's called a deep insight into tech. We are going to be talking about 9 tracks in the tech space. So if you would love to know what parts you want to join or what parts you would want to further your tech journey into, this event is actually it's going to come in handful, because we're bringing people from the industry to come talk about tracks like game development, mobile, Android, Flutter, talking about front end and back end, things like that. So if you want to know what they're all about and what they entail and what you can do, career opportunities in it, the event is going to be very, very helpful. So the link to that also is dsunilag.dev/tech. So it's a week event and I'd love to see everyone there. So thank you very much again for joining this event. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Shadrach. And thank you everyone for joining this event. And also thank you, Sarah, for moderating this event. Goodbye, everyone.